Let's continue our discussion of Emily Falk's book, What We Value. Today is the 8th part of our interpretation. Let's bring this book to a close. Its core idea is that each of us has a value system in the brain that tells us what is good, what we should do, and helps us make choices among various options. The value system is not rigid. It is strongly shaped by context. Sometimes, just a small reminder can change how much someone cares about a particular cue, and thus change their decision. And the two biggest influences on our value system are the self-related system and the social-related system in the brain. In this final segment, let's look at culture from the perspective of the value system. Here, culture does not mean folk arts, dragon dances, or handicrafts. Nor does it mean education level. When a social scientist talks about culture, they mean social norms. The shared ways of doing things, the implicit agreement about how one should live. For example, does your society support gender equality? Does it emphasize obedience to the group, or encourage individuals to follow their inner voice? That is culture. The same behavior may be rebellious in one culture, but perfectly acceptable in another. Culture shapes our value judgments through the social-related system. But humans are not passive recipients of cultural forces. If there is one central insight from Falk's book, it is this. You can actively influence the value system. And therefore, culture itself. Culture is malleable. Recently I watched a history program that talked about the year 1057 in China, the second year of the Song dynasty's Jiao era. It was a remarkable year. A talent explosion. Over 1,000 years of imperial examinations, no other year produced as many exceptional individuals. The program suggested that, this year marked the emergence of a new kind of personality in Chinese civilization. This personality was the Junzi, the cultivated person. But wait, didn't the concept of Junzi already exist in the time of Confucius? How could it become a new personality in the Northern Song? Well, in Confucius's era, Junzi primarily referred to social status. If you were noble-born, with land, rank, and guaranteed income, you were a Junzi. If you were a commoner working for survival, you were a Shaoran. Confucius believed that the Junzi should have higher moral standards, implying that if a commoner compromised for survival, it was understandable. But by the Northern Song, that logic no longer worked. Because the Song dynasty abolished the aristocracy. After the chaos and revolts of the Tang, powerful clans were wiped out, and society became more egalitarian. The imperial exam system became a path for commoners. People like Su Shi came from educated families, but not from aristocratic lineages. Books became cheaper. Even ordinary families could study and pursue office. So the meaning of Junzi had to change. It was no longer a social class, but a moral identity. If you held yourself to the standards of a Junzi, you were one. This helped produce the brilliant intellectual landscape of the Song. But to be blunt, the dignity of Chinese intellectuals did not last long. The Song was conquered. Then the Ming dynasty under Zhu Yuanzhang imposed authoritarian rule. Even Mencius, which taught the people are more important than the ruler, was temporarily banned. The Junzi's moral identity was replaced by test-taking survival strategies. So later, when people said, Junzi, they imagined a polite, honest, well-behaved, rule-following good person. But a true Junzi is not a consumer of order. A true Junzi is a producer of order. The program used 3 lines from Confucius to define a Junzi. A gentleman cherishes virtue. The virtue of the gentleman is like the wind. The gentleman is not a vessel. Let's focus on the second. The virtue of the gentleman is like the wind. The implication is that a Junzi is active, shaping the social climate, while the small person is passive, blown around like grass. In other words, the Junzi has the responsibility to transform social norms. This is not the moral etiquette you learned in school. Nor is it the mainstream culture of modern elites. This is a more ancient, higher-level Chinese culture. In classical China, the leading thinkers, from Jia Yi and Dong Zhongshu, to Wang Yangming and Xinghua Fan, and especially in the Northern Song. Regardless of whether they favored reform or tradition, none would say, I will faithfully carry out the leader's intention. Every one of them had an independent vision. To please authority, to say, I do whatever the ruler likes, was the behavior of a small person. As a Junzi, you must independently assess what society lacks, decide where it should go, and initiate influence. But I'm just one person. Can I influence culture? Yes. Neuroscience supports you. Neuroscience makes 3 claims about culture and the value system. First, our value judgments are indeed influenced by culture. For example, there was a case where someone tested a German bank's security by creating a disturbance and pressuring guards to help. It worked because German culture highly values public order, so disorder is embarrassing. Try this in Greece, and nobody would care. Culture shows up directly in the brain. One study compared Chinese and Danish participants. When shown words describing the self, such as, I am kind, or, I am an artist, both groups activated the self-related system. But Danes activated it slightly more. But when shown social roles, like, I am a father, a tenant, a professor, Chinese participants activated both the self-related and social-related systems more strongly. In simple terms, Danes define themselves more directly. Chinese people define themselves more through relationships. Another study found that, Latino and European Americans were equally willing to financially support family members, but the brains of Latinos showed stronger activation in the social-related system, suggesting the act was more tied to caring, while Europeans expressed more of a sense of duty. Culture is not software you reinstall. It is embedded in neural architecture. But are we prisoners of culture? No. Second, everyone holds multiple cultural identities, and you can choose which identity to activate. In one study, Canadians compared maple syrup and honey. If reminded of their Canadian identity first, they preferred maple syrup. If not, they were more neutral. Another finding. People who identify strongly with the stereotype of women being relational, are more likely to conform to social pressure. But women who see themselves as independent resisted conformity. And their social-related system was just as activated. So the social-related system does not enforce conformity. It enforces your social values. Your value may not be follow society. It may be change society. Third, you can influence culture. At least at a local scale. And you can start with people around you. Research shows that in a small group deciding on lunch, if you assert, let's eat noodles, others will likely follow to maintain harmony, activating their social-related system. And afterward, they may even think the noodles tasted better than expected. This is the collaboration of the social-related and value systems. Do this a few times, and you may turn your friends into noodle lovers. That is the wind of the Junzi. Another study showed that cooperative behavior spreads from group to group. And so does competitive behavior. Influencing others is not difficult. So why not be someone who intentionally influences? Even if you can't change adults, you can influence your children. When you see a child sharing a toy, say, look, that child shared his toy. Or when you share ice cream at home, I'm happy to give you some because our family values sharing. Explain the values behind actions. Children will absorb them. Culture is not fixed. It is built one interaction at a time. One study I love was done by Princeton researchers in 2016. They recruited students in 56 New Jersey middle schools and designated them as seed students. They told them, our school climate has problems. You are the seeds. Decide what you want this school to become. And influence others. These students believed their schools shouldn't tolerate bullying or discrimination. They took action. They made posters, gave out wristbands, created identity and community. Within a year, disciplinary incidents dropped by a third, and explicit opposition to discrimination rose significantly. To me, this was a Junzi experiment. Define your values, start with those around you, and influence outward. We have now finished what we value. Most people read books passively. Some read with vigilance, determined not to be influenced easily. But a few read with initiative, wanting to influence others, perhaps even shape society. Like a Junzi. Since the Qin dynasty, Chinese intellectuals have lowered their posture, and after Zhu Yuanzhang, rarely stood tall again. Yet, ironically, In a barbarian land like New Jersey, a group of teenagers were learning to be Junzi. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.